Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 189 of the podcast. In this episode, I talk with Shefchunas. It's great to have him back on the podcast, and we talk about how to connect with students in this season when churches and student ministries aren't gathering, but even beyond that, because we talk about the book When Relationships Matter that he co-authored with Reggie Joyner and Kristen Ivy. So we talk about the point of that book, which is to connect students, to give them a place to belong, where they're known, where they have a leader who believes in them and sticks with them over a year or multiple years, really. And that really matters right now in this season with churches not gathering and students can feel disconnected. And he even talks about in the interview his concerns with that. And I think they're very warranted. And so we just talk about what does he see happening in the season that he likes? What should student ministry leaders focus on during this season? And then we do talk about the book and what are some of the principles from that we can apply regardless of what is going on, because students always need to be connected. As usual, you can get the links and notes and downloads and all those things at nickblevins.com/episode 189. Before we jump into this interview, I want to let you know that if you're listening to this the day or day after it comes out, we're hosting a free webinar with Ministry Boost about a COVID-19 family ministry roadmap. So what does it look like for our children's and student ministries and really our churches to move forward now from where we're gathering online only to picking a date when things are going to kind of relaunch. And that might look a number of different ways. It might be a staged relaunch. It might be groups first and then services. And then after we launch, what are the things we need to focus on in those areas? We're going to really dig into that resource that we've created that you can download for free, has dozens and dozens of documents and files and helpful information. And my favorite part that we're still working on right now as I record this is some key decisions and questions that every church leader, every staff needs to answer as they think about reopening and relaunching and what it's going to look like after they launch. And so we're going to talk about that on Thursday, May 7th, 12:30 Eastern in a webinar. If you miss it, you're listening to this after it comes out, no worries. You'll be able to catch a replay. And then mark your calendars because May 21st, we're going to have another free webinar. It's also a Thursday at 12:30 Eastern on the new family retention plan, a resource that we created with Ministry Boost with the help of John Burkmeyer and Gina McLean. And so put those items on your calendar. You can check them out at ministryboost.org. You don't want to miss that. And something else you don't want to miss is the tool called Huddle Up. Huddle Up is a tool that allows you to communicate with your volunteers or with anybody, really, group leaders, students in a group, and lets you send emails and texts safely with accountability, and it keeps it all in one place. There's a chat feature. You can control who can and can't start chats, and there's mobile app. You can see it through email. So basically, it takes all the things we need to do right now in this season for sure, which is communicate better, and gives you a tool to do that that's unified, that's safe, but at the same time, for the person receiving the communication, gives them a chance to determine, do I want text? Do I want an email? What do I want that to look like? So that's a great tool. We're going to have Scott on to talk about that more in a future episode, but you can check that out at nickblevins.com/huddleup. All right, let's jump into my interview with Shef, where we talked about the book, When Relationships Matter, how to build kind of a strategy and a foundation to help students feel connected and be connected to, a group of peers and a consistent leader, and why that matters so much right now. And he talks about a couple of things that he thinks student ministry leaders should be focusing on, and I agree with him completely. So let's listen to that interview. Well, we have Shefchunas back on the podcast. Welcome back, Shef.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Give us an update. I don't know how long. It feels like it's been a while since you were on, because I remember you maybe the first year we talked coaching and that coaching model and student ministry, all that. But a lot has happened since you've been on.
Well, a lot has happened. I popped on Skype and it said 2016 had your name next to it. So I think that was the last time we talked.
That makes sense. That's when this launched. And so, it's been a while.
Yeah. So I was at North Point at that time. And then I moved to Orange about 2.5 years ago. And then we acquired Specialties very soon after. And then my job has kind of switched and changed, which is I expected to kind of happen once we figured out how that worked. And so about 80% of my job right now is directing Specialties with a few people around the country. So these phone calls are normal for me, actually.
Yeah.
Because I do a lot of work on the phone, or and I've been doing my best to get face to face with people so I can see them. So, I've got some Ashley and Minnesota were the two full-time people who are working on this, and then we have a lot of great people who have been working with YS for a long time who've jumped in to help out in Orange County, obviously with Doug and Josh. Up in Washington State, Tamara, who runs our exhibit hall, and then here, a girl named Jen who helps us out. Tim, who picks up phones. He's been picking up phones for years and helping us in 1,000 ways. So this is my normal life, Monday afternoons. So I'm going to leave a call and jump on that call. So
yeah, working from home and digital and teams spread out all over the place. And I have to ask before we talk about some other stuff, taking that youth specialties role, and obviously the National Youth Workers Convention being the big part of that. Yeah. I mean, is that the bulk of the time you're spending? Is that, or are there other parts of youth specialties still that you're giving some time to?
Yeah, I mean, youth specialties was a lot more than it currently is. It had gone through some transition and different owners, and when we got it back, we wanted to kind of revive the heart of youth ministry, which is advocating for youth pastors and raising the bar for youth ministry in this country, and really looking at what's next for youth ministry and paying attention to culture, paying attention to the issues that are being asked. And so, most of it right now is the National Youth Workers Convention, which happens every November. And it's our opportunity to be together with people who get us, people who love what we love and do what we do, because most of us are alone in our churches and the only ones who get to do what we do and worry about what we worry about and hear what we hear and call DFACs or whatever it is, for families that we're dealing with and all that hard stuff. That's what we want to focus on in the National Youth Workers Convention. But we also put out a lot of free content through our blogs, and we try to direct anything we see out there worthwhile through those and our social media. And then the other thing we have is a job bank. And that job bank, what we're trying to do is connect the best churches with the best youth workers. We feel that's one of the best ways to raise the bar for youth ministry, is to get people connected faster with a job. So, a bunch of folks are always wondering, is there a better opportunity out there for me? Or is there a church who gets me maybe a little bit better as a connection? And that's what we're trying to connect those churches with those youth workers. So
yeah, and that job bank's been around for a while, hasn't it? I mean, I feel like 20 years ago, I remember that was like a premiere.
Yeah, and we're working right now on really putting in some nice functionality to connect people a lot faster, and that will be out by November. So this summer, really, if you start to pay attention to it, there'll be ways to kind of put your name out there without putting your name out there.
yeah, that's important. Yeah. That's cool.
And knowing, being informed of new jobs that open that might fit a specific profile, those sorts of things. It should be super fun.
Cool. Well, before we talk, we're going to talk about your book, When Relationships Matter. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about the current context that we're in, because we're recording this in the midst of COVID-19, coronavirus. Churches aren't meeting in person, at least most of them aren't. Student ministries, I'm seeing them do, all kinds of different things. But I mean, what do you feel like? We're 3-4 weeks into this now. What are your thoughts on what the focus should be, or what you're seeing out there? Give me some of that, some of your perspective on it.
Well, we've been working with Orange forever, and one of the hardest things to talk about, because it's just not fun to talk. It's one of the most powerful things you can talk about, but it's a lot of people want to talk about programming and games and fun and all those sorts of things. But the idea of partnering with parents, we have been pushing it for years, and I don't think it's ever been more important or ever been more easy. It's always been difficult. So it's still not easy, but it's definitely not as difficult as it was, because parents are very receptive to some help right now. And so it's a great opportunity, I think, for the church to connect. As far as like being present as well, when it comes to student ministry, paying attention, it's forced us to kind of enter their digital world. Those of us who are older and working with kids, and it's forced us to learn how to turn on or how to take, or how to, all these things. So that's nothing but good, I think, for the long run of student ministry and connecting with kids and understanding that culture. I'm primarily concerned, though, about the isolation. Teenagers need teenagers. They need adult connections that are not their parents. And this is a tough time. So I'm worried about mental health. It's hit a couple of times, very close to home in the recent weeks. And so I'm not just concerned about that, but in general, it just makes sense that's going to be an issue. So I've been encouraging youth workers and the youth volunteers and even students, like, work your list. Just open your phone and call someone you haven't called in a while, especially if you haven't seen them in a while. Mm-hmm. Just connect. And if you can connect, the more senses you can engage, the better, So if you can do it through a video call, give it a shot. A text message is nice. A phone call is better. A video call is about as good as we can do right now. And then, hopefully we move very quickly, very soon, to where we can be physically present together. If not, we might be distanced, from each other for a season here.
Yeah.
But that's great. But I also think really in this season, the other thing I'm seeing is opportunity to work on your ministry. We work in a job where, our job is our lives, and we get drawn in and everything's important. And we very rarely can step back and look at our ministry from the outside because we're constantly working in it. And I think this season has some opportunities. In fact, I've been doing Friday whiteboards on the blog, which are just a 5-minute whiteboard session about strategy for your ministry, just because I'm like, people are tired of talking about anxiety and, just step back and let me work on my ministry while it's kind of parked in the driveway, and
sure.
There might be some time. Now I realize there's a lot of things you're still doing, but the constant running is not happening, So I think it's a great opportunity to work on it instead of just in it.
Yeah, we actually, the restaurant that's closest to our house, we got takeout from there like a couple weeks ago. And when I went in, they grew. It was like one of those little buildings that really, grew and they added on. And it was one of those things where you'd never design it that way from scratch. Like it's a terrible entrance and, and all that stuff. And the owner was totally redoing all that. And he said to me, I didn't even know him. I met him that day. And he said, I've always wanted to do this, but always knew I had to shut down the business to do it. And never wanted to shut down the business, but now I had to. So
that's funny. I saw that. My favorite wing place is the same way. It just grew, and it looks like, you're walking through an old hospital. Like, this doesn't even make sense, Yeah. Because they just keep growing and growing and growing. And that restaurant was the same way. And I drove by it the other day, and there's dumpsters outside, and they're ripping booths out. They're still ripping food.
Yeah. Same as this place, but it is a good time to work on it. That's absolutely true.
That's a great illustration of what we can do right now with our ministry.
And the book, When Relationships Matter, Make Your Church a Place Where Kids and Teenagers Belong, is about like working on maybe the structures and systems things, right, that help support these relationships. Give us like an overview of the book, and then we can talk about some of the pieces of it.
Sure. I think, the title, When Relationships Matter, really is about the idea of creating a ministry where you imagine a kid lying in bed on Sunday morning and the rain's hitting the roof just right and it's perfect temperature and it's like, this is my only day to sleep in, right? And it's the difference between a kid getting out of bed because they should go to church and a kid getting out of bed because someone's going to miss them. So we kind of start with that big idea, and then we start talking about, so what are the things you can do? What are the things you can control? What are the things you can systematize to prioritize that one thing that can't be systematized, which is a relationship? And you just can't, you can do all kinds of things around it to make sure relationships can thrive with willing people, but you just can't, it's like playing the right music to get people to dance. You've got to pay attention to that. Same thing. You've got to do the right things to help relationships get deeper. And so there's 1,000 little things when you step back and ask that big question, like, and imagine that kid lying in bed going to see somebody instead of coming to a place in a program. It just changes the way you start to think about a lot of things. It changes your paradigm. So that's what this book is about. It's 1,000 different little things to think about to help make relationships matter even more.
Now, it's at the end of the book, the whole illustration about concerts, classrooms, and circles. I like that. I resonate with that because I think, we're talking more student ministry, but I think it applies in children's ministry too. But when you think about student ministry, how would you help somebody understand this, knowing that I feel like, I remember a conversation a month ago I had with a student ministry leader at a new church, and essentially that he has 3 gatherings a week. Now he wants to trim that down to 2 or 1, but he's having to think through how to, I got this thing, it's an optional thing for middle school. And then they got Sunday morning, and then he's got a Wednesday night. And in my head, I was thinking, which one is the relational small group type of, circle, as the book would say. What would you say, like, how could describe that kind of illustration and maybe speak to people that are using different models of ministry, some more relational, some less? What's the difference there?
Well, again, everybody's in a different context and everybody has different realities that they have to deal with. Even if he wants to move to 3, less than 3, that might not be his choice, right?
It's right. Yeah, it might not be.
I talk to guys and ladies all the time that are like, like they're just stuck in it. So they've got to do and that's leadership, right? I mean, that's just the reality of it. You never get to do it exactly the way you want to do it, but you should have, the ultimate goal, and you get to adjust and all of that sort of thing. But I think the big question is group time or a relationship with another adult or an ongoing consistent relationship with an adult a part of your program or the point of your program? And that's really where you have to kind of step back and think about it. I remember, and this took us years, because if I go back to North Point 15 years ago, we were struggling with this because we had decided that circles were more important than rows. And we had, decided that we're going to put small group leaders with kids for a season, which was all good. But we hadn't changed our program from the old model. And I realized, like, we're doing a sermon for people in rows, not people in circles. And I realized that because in the early days, I was a volunteer. I was a small group leader. I had way too big a group, 26th grade boys. And I remember sitting on the floor, because we would sit on the floor in circles with these 20 kids as I'm trying to keep them somewhat calm. And that I remember praying for the speaker to go longer so small group was shorter, because that speaker would do a very complete talk, which was great, which is what we do in big church. It's a problem, though, because now you're sending a volunteer, in this case me, into a room with 26th grade boys with nothing to do but review for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And that is not, and at that time we weren't going into a room. We were going into a corner in a hallway. So good luck. I hear people all the time, small group doesn't work for us. And then I ask some questions and I'm like, well, there's 36 sixth grade boys in a hallway corner with 36 sixth grade girls across. Nope, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, that doesn't work for anybody.
Yeah, let's start talking about your systems and how, some ideas where we can deal with your realities to make it a little bit better. And then to set your volunteers up for success. Because at the end of the day, one of my favorite things to hear from a volunteer is, you guys went over, we don't have enough small group time. So we adjusted the talk, for instance. And if you go back to Andy Stanley's book, Communicating for Change, Andy Stanley and Lane Jones, he has a model that he uses. He doesn't actually use it anymore because he's so established, but it's a great model if you're picking up communicating, is me, we, God, you, we. Me, here's a story about me to connect you. You, I bet you struggle with similar things. So it's me, we, God. We struggle with similar things. God, here's what God has to say about it. Now, what are you going to do about it? This is the part where the communicator gets to go, if you're a 6th grade boy, this is what it means to you. If you're an 8th grade girl, this is what it means to you. If you're 11th grade, well, you don't say that in the talk anymore because that's the small group leader's job. And so if you watch a really good groups-based talk or a talk that's making group the point, not a part, you might think as a trained communicator, that guy, that lady missed the most important part, which it is. It's the funnest part to do, right? Because that's where everybody, he was talking directly to me,
Yeah.
That's the part you got to give up, which is hard because a lot of youth workers are trying to be lead pastors or trying, it's a stepping stone on their way and they're trying to develop that skill. And so that's hard to do. And a lot of times I just had to tell people I couldn't use them anymore because they just refused to do it. And then the last part is we, me, we, God, you, which you give to the small group leaders, and we, which is the kind of a vision cast. Imagine if we all get that, which you can skip. You can say, now we're going to go set up small group. And in fact, I found one of the most important things I always used volunteer communicators so that the communicators were constantly rotating. So the small group leader was the consistent face they saw. Mm-hmm. So a communicator might come in for a series, but they won't see him again for 2 or 3 months, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And again, that's just another small change when you think about, this isn't about the communicator. This is about the small group leader. How do we, help them be consistent? One of the most powerful things I would get these volunteers or these people I would actually pay from Young Life or whatever outside the church to come in and speak was, here's the question you're setting up. Here's the first question in small group. And I want you to build attention. I want you to make them laugh and connect with them. build attention, and then I want you to ask this question. And handle the biblical truth well, because that's our job. We're trained in Scripture, and our job is that's one of our stewardships. We need to make sure that happens well. Take that out of the small group leader's hands, because your small group leader may or may not, probably aren't biblically trained. But now it's about, how do I wrap that truth around a 6th grade boy's life, an 8th grade girl's life, an 11th grade girl's life, and then so you can contextualize the talks to really think through groups. It becomes easier and harder at the same time to communicate well. It also shortens your talks.
Sure. Yeah. That makes sense.
In no more than 20 minutes. You can go longer the older they are, but you've got to get them in group to start processing it. And that's what this generation wants. They don't want to be talked at. They want to talk,
Mm-hmm.
So
it fits.
Anyway, that's one example.
And you can fit that into, like, I'm thinking of churches that have like a Sunday school is one of their things. Like that person I was talking to, that was his Sunday morning. His Wednesday night was probably like what he would kind of consider his primary student gathering. And my question was, well, which one's going to be like the primary relational connection? Like where are you going to get that kind of thing? And so I think it works in any model. You just have to figure that out, right? Like where we're going to connect people the most.
You do have to figure it out. It's tough though, because in those models, the more, when I coach a lot of people in this and try to help them engage and think through this, traditionally the groups models usually during the week. But the other thing we find is in a lot of churches, those are different kids.
This was a little bit.
You know what I mean? And so how do you connect the two? And that's one thing we created. We called it an expansion pack at Orange, where it was related to the talk, and you could actually use the videos because they're shorter. You could speak to them one, show the video over here, and there were some other things to do. But to ask volunteers to be a Sunday and a Wednesday volunteer, that is a big ask, So some people will do it. But I don't know that that's a really hard one to recruit for. I mean, I recruited volunteers to come every Sunday for 3 years, and a lot of people think that's impossible, but I can tell you it works. If you cast a big enough vision, the right people will get excited about it. Nobody has time to do anything anymore. You have to cast a vision. And that's part of this book as well, how you cast a vision to leaders big enough that they decide to spend their time with you. And that's more under our Empower Leaders stuff, and the training, and how you recruit them, how you train them. And that's a 20% of the book is all about that stuff.
Well, the part before that, like I went to the end, talk about the concerts, classrooms, circles analogy. I think it's a good framework. I start at the end. I'm like the guy reading the end of the book. But back at the beginning, it does talk about improving your structure. So if I do think about someone who maybe this isn't the model they have right now, whatever format it looks like, but like they would say their small groups are apart, or they're not even apart. They want to make them the point. What are a few tips you would give early on about the structure of what it needs to look like to make relationships matter?
Again, go to the big idea. You probably have a relational side or a Sunday school side or a discussion sort of side of things, and just think, how do I, and that's the thing I tell people all the time, like, don't go into your lead pastor and say, we got to stop doing what we're doing. We got to start doing this, because my guess is what you're doing is shaped somewhat like what we're talking about doing here. And then you go in and you cast vision for, here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing, I want our kids to have stronger relationships with strong Christian adults. I mean, who's gonna argue with that?
No, we can't have that here at this church.
To be more long-term. So they're doing life with them. I just think that discipleship's going to, drop those power words, because that's what it is, it's going to happen during this time. I'm not talking about manipulating it. I'm talking about casting vision. There's a difference between the two, and that difference is in the leader's heart. But we just really want to cast vision there. So I would think through those things. Think about who are your strongest leaders. I bet they're their strongest leaders because they're the most relational leaders. A lot of people are there and they're like, leaders, I am it. Like, I'm the only one. And I always say to them, if you have more than one gender and more than 10 kids in your ministry, more than one gender or more than 10 kids, you need help. You need to start recruiting another adult to lead with you. And so that's everybody, by the way. So that's where you start. Like, think through your Rolodex of people who would be great with kids, and then sit down and plan how you're going to cast vision for walking with kids for a season and talking about some of these things. So those are some of the ideas. I think just the idea of creating an active roster, which is this idea of not just the kids who come all the time. If you close your eyes and see your ministry, you see the kids who come all the time. But I think if you were really paying attention to the names on the list, there are a lot of kids who are in your ministry that you can't remember their name because they come they come quarterly and then they come to your camps. You know what I mean? But they're part of your ministry. And so you want to engage volunteers and connecting with them, seeing if you can get those kids to come more. I mean, when attendance is growing, and you should measure attendance is not the point, but you should. But when attendance is growing, a great question to ask yourself is attendance growing because more kids are coming, or is attendance growing because kids are coming more often, which is really what you want to see.
Yeah.
You want to see kids coming more often because now they're lying in bed saying, in the South, we call everybody Mr. Shef or Mr. Tom. Mr. Tom's going to miss me, or he's going to call me and say, where was I? If I don't show up, or I told him last week I'd have this Bible verse memorized and I've got it, So that's those are the sort of things that, again, it's systems that you can measure to do the things that you can't measure.
Yeah. Now, thinking about churches that I'm thinking of student ministries, particularly in high school, sometimes middle school too, they have a separate small group. Do you have an opinion in terms of structure? Do you think one is better than the other, having everything at once and it's large group, go right to small group in the building, or having like small groups midweek, large group separate? What's your opinion on that?
I think the closer you can get small group to happen to the talk, the more powerful that small group's going to be. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have a second small group or second experience that magnifies what was done. So, for instance, I would put if I had a volunteer, I'd put my primary relational person with the group that happens as close to the main talk as possible. And then maybe recruit some secondary volunteers who are still great relationally, but they're going to do more content with them on a Wednesday night or something. Wherever you have your most kids, wherever you get your core, that's kind of where you want to do that the best you can. And you need to have the goal of moving kids from Wednesday to Sunday or Sunday to Wednesday, wherever you decide that is. But I remember talking to Andy Stanley about communicating, and we were having the discussion about what is the difference between communicating to students and communicating to adults. And Andy's quote, and I've quoted him several times, so you may have heard this before, but he said, if I knew every adult was going directly to small group from the end of my talk, it would change everything about the way I communicated, which for one of the most well-known communicators in, the recent church history, I thought was a pretty significant statement. He said it would change everything about the way he communicates. And it would be a lot of things he wouldn't say because he was setting people up to really have the discussion. And if you've watched him over the years, he has taught more and more and more to the conversations. And I don't know if I can prove this statistically, but as a member of the church still and being part of a small group, I can tell you that our groups have drifted towards, let's talk about, and we put our groups on Sunday night, let's talk about what he said this morning. And that's just a bigger, it was more fresh. I had recent thoughts and we could wrestle with it, but he's now got questions after every sermon. And in fact, if you watch him online, you may or may not see that, but he pauses for an edit. So the television.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
And he starts talking about the questions. And so it's just what matters to this generation and this, they need to wrestle with it. Rows are not working. And microphones are important, but much of discipleship can't happen from a microphone. You've got to be able to see someone's eyes. You've got to hear how they respond to your questions and your issues. It's just so important.
Now, with leaders, and you mentioned the section of the book about empower leaders, and it's 20% and getting those. Give us a couple tips from that. Do you think people should start from imagine I'm thinking of people that this isn't their model. Like they're doing something, they probably have volunteers, but it's maybe not weekly and it's community and here if they're in small groups or whatever. Do you lead out with, hey, 3-year commitment? Do you start with a 1 year? Is it like, I don't think you can go less than a year, but do you think you start out the gate strong like that? Or what do you think that looks like?
I think when you start, you start with a list of people you know are going to kill it, and you get on the phone and you cast vision. And I want you to walk with kids for a season, because if the younger they are, the shorter term you really need. Mm-hmm. And what happens is with middle schoolers and high schoolers, like if I say I'm the 6th grade small group leader, that's like waiting in line for a roller coaster. And just as I'm about to step foot on it, I decide to get to the back of the line again, because relationally I've got them right where I need them about a year in to really, start to go deeper with them. And they're getting out of 6th grade, which is super important, or part of it, or whether they're 9th or 10th graders, those sorts of things. So I believe, a 2 to 3 year commitment is great. But if you're just starting, you get people pumped up and take what you can get. I know my buddy Scott, who was at Willow and now he's out in California, not sure, Ruben. He believed in a long-term commitment, but he went through I'm going to do a 1-year strategy and cast vision of why it's important to stick with your kids. I had a really strong lead pastor that would help us recruit and believed in it. And so I could say, look, it's a 3-year commitment. And a lot of people would get up and leave. And probably some of those people would have been good small group leaders, but the length of it spooked them. But the people who stayed were 99% gold and 1% why we need background checks, right? So that's
yeah.
But after you hear a commitment like that, I need you every Sunday for 3 years, and I need you 2 weekends a year, because that's what it takes. And I love to start my recruiting, and it's one of my tips for empowering leaders. I love to be one of the first things to say to a possible volunteer is, look, this job isn't for everybody.
Yeah.
And in this day and age, the right person says, okay, tell me about this job. The wrong person says, I just want to check a box. I just want to do something. Well, I'm not looking for people who want to check boxes and serve donuts every other week. Actually, I am, and they can. And I have every other week, responsibilities on my hospitality team. But if you want to be a small group leader, you just need to know this is way too important for it not to be an every Sunday thing. And that's what it takes, Yeah. So the right people get pumped up about that. I promise. I know it seems crazy, but that's one of my tips. It was one of my big lessons at North Point. I kept trying to make the job easier. And what I found was the right people, they want a tough job. They want a real job. They want to know they're doing ministry. And so I just ended up handing more over. And I got nervous about it. It was tough, but that's the journey. Is like when you see your stewardship not as your program, but you see your stewardship as the quality of relationships in your ministry, it's a big paradigm change. And, programming is important. And it's a huge, important part of your step, but it is not the point. And I think this day and time has proven that. You want to talk about home groups? We're figuring out if home groups will work, nobody's business right now. And the more I think about it, the more I think, oh my gosh, we may have just gotten over a hump we've needed to get over. Just with how busy kids are and all this sort of stuff, that we can connect virtually and maybe not even at the same times, but we can figure out, new ways to keep those quality relationships going through these seasons. And it's an important time. So, I know, in talking to the guys at North Point who are figuring it out, they just put they shorten their talks and put them out, and the kids watch a video, and then they created Zoom groups where they can monitor that. They have better attendance than they've ever had as far as attendance records, because it's all digitally checked off. They've actually grown. They have 20% or something more kids in groups than they had last year at this time. I may be exaggerating the percentage, but it's significant. Because they're looking for something to do. It's an opportunity, and they're connecting relationally. Again, physical presence matters. It's just not an option right now. And so when we can move back to a place where we can get as much physical presence as possible, but this is still the next best thing and kids are connected with it, I think that could be huge. But those leaders are going to do a lot of that without you even asking them to, because they're the right people.
Yeah, so. That's key. Yeah, that's key.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up, the one section of the book is about creating experiences to make relationships matter. What's like some of the distinction there between experiences that don't make relationships matter, and how do we know the difference?
Yeah, I think one of the parts is having imaginary conversations. Is when you start thinking through your program in terms of what sort of conversations is this going to start? Or that's the beginning of your planning. Like when a communicator speaks, one of the things we would do is our Disciple Now weekend, which we called Walk In Wisely weekend, or our fall retreats, which were named different for the different grades. One of the things we would do is we would get the primary communicator, because camps are a perfect opportunity to kind of teach a big idea, and that everybody's going to be in the room for all 4, 5, 6 sessions, whatever you have. But I would have the primary communicator create a video and speak to the small group leaders, and I always made sure he or she said, "Hey, this is how I'm going to set you up for small group." And so the point was, for the communicator and the small group leader, they felt the weight of, oh, no, small group is the point of these 4, these 5, these 6 small groups are the point of this weekend. And so that's one of the ways you start to think about that. So you're imagining the conversations, you're creating activities that are going to cause kids, to communicate, talk. Those are really important. Controlling the climate. Again, when we were talking about 30 kids in the hallway across from 30 kids in the hallway, I realized that a lot of people can't do anything about that. I usually push back and challenge them because there's a lot more options than they think they are. I mean, we were in a place where we had, I don't even know the numbers. We had a quarter of the small group rooms we needed, and all the rest of the kids were either in the hallway or in the big room. And we had to come up with a short-term fix until we could build some buildings and fix that stuff. Again, sometimes a reality, sometimes not. But I remember we got a bunch of pallet wood and we started creating dividers just so there was a visual, like you were still in your quadrant and you could hear murmurs above it, but visually there wasn't anything. And that changed the quality of the small group. And that's really important. Later on, what we learned as a church was students need 4 walls the best we can do it. And so our church has actually changed and morphed over the years, where we no longer had an office area, and we began to office out of the student area and create rooms that were used as offices during the week and small group rooms on Sunday. And that was just one of the ways our culture and our church changed over the 13 years I worked there. But those were small group rooms used as offices, not offices used as small group rooms, which is a very, very important difference. I remember if they would come to me and say, "Hey, they broke my lamp," I'd be like, "No, they broke their lamp. Do you want to, buy them another one?"
Yeah.
But for the most part, I mean, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of experiences. And besides eating candy that you leave out, they're pretty good about the offices,
Yeah. We did that. We took that idea from you when we expanded. Yeah, we expanded, leased some space next to the building we own. And it's actually where our office was. We leased more. And it's helped us add a separate 4th, 5th preteen type environment. And then it's also high school groups. And my office is now a small group room, which to me is an upgrade. Like I got a better office.
Oh, yeah. There's one got some couches or beanbags.
Exactly. So,
totally.
That's and part of it's like, it just makes sense. I mean, the weekend matters so much. How do you not find a dual use for something like that, where one isn't used during the week and the other one's not used on the weekend? Yeah. It just makes sense. So that's a good thing.
To sit empty all week in this day and age is a bad idea. So,
Well, as we wrap up, how can people connect with you? They can get the book at orangebooks.com or Amazon, right? And how can they connect?
When relationships matter. And it really is, to be clear, it really is, if you've read the book Lead Small or given Lead Small to your small group leaders, it really is the book not written to the small group leader, but written to the leader of the small group leaders. I know that a couple of churches, I know they've been given this book to obviously their staff, but also their key leader volunteers, for them to understand this idea of creating a culture where people serve and make relationships matter like that. The other way is I'm at coachshef.com, SHEF, coachshef.com. And that's same on social and everything else. And every Friday on the YS whiteboard, I'll be doing some videos for now and blogging there as well. So those are different ways. You can see me at the Orange Conference. I'll be doing that at the end of what is this month? April? And then we'll be at the National Youth Workers Convention in November in Columbus, Ohio.
Well, thanks for coming back on the podcast and talking about the book and spending some time with us. And thanks for what you all are doing. We didn't talk about this a lot, but what you all are doing to like resource leaders during this time. So thanks for that too. Appreciate that.
Expect as much free and good content as we can to youth workers. So,
all right. Thanks.
All right. Love you guys. Talk to you later.
Well, I always love talking with Shef. It's great to have him back on the podcast again. You can get all the links and notes at nickblevins.com/189. But here are a few action items I thought of coming out of that conversation. One is to get the book When Relationships Matter, because they do matter, especially for students and for kids. And so how can you build a system for that and then apply that in your church? And right now might be a season for that. Another thing you can do is to put in a plan to talk with every student this week, next week. Maybe it can't happen in a week. Maybe it's going to take a few weeks. Maybe it's not you. It's a team of volunteers that you're going to put together. But we need to connect now more than ever, just like Shef talked about. That is really, really important. And then the third thing I think about is to pick one thing to work on. Like now's the season to connect with people and to work on your ministry. So what are you going to work on? It might be connecting better with leaders. And so you're going to use the Huddle Up tool that I mentioned at nickblevins.com/huddle up. It might be your roadmap for the future. And so you want to make sure you attend the COVID-19 Family Ministry Roadmap webinar we're hosting with Ministry Boost on Thursday, May 7th, or watch the replay. And you can check that out at ministryboost.org. It could even be a retention plan. And I mentioned that we're going to have a webinar about that resource on May 21st. So there's lots of things coming up. I hope, first and foremost, you're focusing on your relationship with God, with your own self-care and health and prioritizing that and your family. Then I also hope you're serving and connecting with people in your church with phone calls, conversations. Maybe you're mailing them notes or cards because people are going to feel disconnected now. But if there's time, beyond that, homeschooling, if you have kids, we're all homeschooling our kids now, which is interesting. And if there is any time left, I think, and I know one thing I'm focusing on is working on the ministry, trying to make it better, using this time that'll be unlike most time we'll ever have to work on it and make it better. And so these are just a few different opportunities we're going to put in front of you. There's free options. There's like a paid resource with the new family retention plan if you want to, have that done for you and not have to start from scratch. But all of it is designed, we hope, to help you as leaders, which is also the purpose of this podcast. So thanks for listening. Hope it has been helpful. And hopefully I'll see you on one of those webinars coming up.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.